And a very warm good morning to all of our participants from literally right around the world. I'm the CEO of the Ethics Institute, and we are really grateful to have such a very dedicated and experienced panel of people joining us this morning for this conversation. We introduced these ethical leadership symposiums when COVID struck last year and we could not host our annual face-to-face conference. And last year's event was a great success, and this year there was even more interest. So more than 1,000 people registered for this event this morning, and they don't only come from all provinces, all 9 provinces here in South Africa, but also from more than 20 African countries, but also literally from right around the world, from Australia, Bangladesh, Portugal, the Netherlands, the UK, the USA, and other places. So also a very warm welcome to our participants from right around the world who joined us this morning for this event. Now, the theme of this event is rebuilding ethical integrity in key institutions after state capture, as you can see there on your screen. And we are really privileged to have 2 panelists with us this morning to discuss their experience in rebuilding 2 absolutely key institutions in South Africa. The first panelist is Advocate Shamila Batoy, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, and the second one is Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, the National Commission of the South African Revenue Service. And both these institutions fell victim to that unfortunate period of state capture, and they were appointed to restore the integrity, but also the ethical integrity of those institutions. I think we are all quite aware that it's easy to lose trust. It's difficult to regain trust because you can't regulate trust. It is something that needs to be cultivated. It takes a lot of hard work to restore that. And we know from a recent survey that trust, especially in the government and government institutions, is at historically low levels. The most recent Edelman's Trust Barometer indicated that only 27% of South Africans trust their government. And from the 27 countries who participated in that specific survey, South Africa was second from the bottom. So we compare very unfavorably to a global average in that survey, where 54% of people on average around the world trust their governments. Now, we know that in the restoring of trust, there are a few key factors. Competence matters, openness matters, but ultimately it is the ethics of your organization that matters. And to set that theme for us and to say a bit more from a private sector perspective, I want to invite the CEO of Siemens here in South Africa, Sabine Del Olmo, to please come on camera and to give us a view from a private sector perspective. Why is it so important that we restore ethical integrity in our key institutions in both the public and the private sector? So Sabine, if you can come on camera, over to you.
Morning, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be here and also having such a great panel participating this morning. Yeah, from a Siemens point of view, it's a privilege to give you the keynote for this event. When we look back at the stories of the state capture report when it came out in 2016, 2017, I think everybody of us was rather in a disbelief that that could happen in the country. And we know that through various commissions and most prominent Zondo Commission, we do see the revelation and how institutions have been abused, but also other organs of the state being subject to male administration. From a Siemens point of view, maybe for the ones of you which don't know who we are, Siemens, we are a company which are supporting industrial processes for electrification, automation, and digitalization. So we have many of the industrial companies here in South Africa as our clients, but also state-owned entities like Eskom, Transnet, PRASA have been our clients, and they have been significant clients of ours. When we look back at Siemens, you might know in 2006, we as a company had a significant compliance scandal or corruption scandal, if you want to call it. And through the revelations which have been, uncovered within our own company, we have put a very, very strict process in place on how we deal as a company with whistleblowers, with events which are not above board, because we also want to make sure, not only for ourselves, because compliance is for us the license to do business. And therefore we have a strong interest that not only our business is compliant, but rather our customers' business, but also the one of our competitors. When I go back, in particular in the opportunities, say in 2010 to 2015, which unfolded in South Africa, like with the locomotive deal, some of the power station activities, tenders at PRASA, these have been great opportunities on the business side. And you would, as a big company of ours, we were very keen when we looked at the tender documents to participate in some of the tenders. But it turned out when we looked a bit deeper into how, certain specifications have been defined, that to some extent, we were not able to participate in these tenders because also we did not know at the time what really happened. We only know this now, but it didn't feel right. And therefore, from our side, we decided in some of the areas not to participate. And that is a difficult call. If you think about, as a CEO of a company, you have to go to your board when there are great opportunities in the market, and you have to tell them, we are not going for it because it's not right. That is a huge challenge. But I was able to do so because our values within Siemens protect whistleblowers, but also management and employees to speak up, because it is for no good if we see that we compete in certain areas and later on we have a compliance problem. So fast forward, how did we solve it? After our 2006 scenario, we put very strong processes in place. And one is our fundamental underlying, policy, our business conduct guidelines, which are value-based. And as I said, which are protecting not only whistleblowers, but management and employees to come forward when things are not right. For us, that also means that in some of the countries, specifically north of the region here in Africa, we are not able to do business because we don't find this conducive environment by which we can make sure that the business we are doing is fair and competitive. However, looking at South Africa and the things which have unfolded, you would have seen that maybe companies like us would withdraw from South Africa. But we did not, because we had a strong belief that in a country like South Africa, with a strong constitution, with a very modern democracy, that eventually the constitution and the democracy values are prevailing over anything what is not going right. And we see it has been. We see that the Zondo Commission, for instance, is busy putting all the documents together so that the NPA is able to create the cases. For us, this is a very step forward in a positive way, because we believe in the values of South Africa. And as we can also see that certain business activities are now moving into the right direction and actions are taken much faster, that we have the right setup also to gain the trust of society and of business. From our point, it is important that not only the government can fix and the state can fix the situation. They can't do it. They want to have an environment where people trust in the state, where they believe everybody is treated fairly, and that in the case of business is conducted on a competitive basis. And therefore also we as business need to speak up when things are not right, to volunteer the information to the respective authorities. For Siemens, it is important to say we have made ethics and compliance part of our strategy. And with our activities like collective actions, for instance, which we do, and today the event which we are hosting is one of our initiatives to share the word on how we deal with it in our company. Because it is important to understand how you work with your competitors, with your employees, suppliers and partners. And the selection of the right people and the right partners for doing business is equally important than just the processes you have internally in your company. So for us, we have embedded that in our strategy. It is a fundamental business imperative for us to conduct business globally. And I'm very happy to participate today in the session. I'm welcoming everybody once again, and I hope you have a great discussion with the panelists. And Dion, I hand over back to you, and I stay online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabine. And what I take away from your introduction there is, number one, the strategic importance of ethics for you as a company, but then also the importance of creating a whole ecosystem of institutions around you to be able to play your game, because otherwise the playing field is just so unequal and so dangerous and so risky. So thank you for setting the theme of rebuilding ethical integrity in key institutions of the state capture. And it now gives me great delight to move on to our two esteemed panelists who will discuss what happened in their own organizations and what we can learn from their experience. Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, and Advocate Shamila Batoy, the National Director of Public Prosecutions. But we've invited a facilitator, a good friend of the Ethics Institute, Professor William Gumede. He's from the School of Governance at the University of the Witwatersrand, and also the executive chairperson of the Democracy Works Foundation. Professor Gumede, given his background in governance, is intimately familiar with a number of our key institutions, and specifically government institutions here in South Africa. And he will kick off the conversation. I want to invite all of you, if you have any questions, and I'm grateful to see that there are already 3 questions in the Q&A, please keep on populating your that Q&A function there with your questions. After the facilitated conversation by Professor Gumede, you will then also relay your questions to the panelists. So if I can invite our 2 panelists to come on camera, please, and also Professor Gumede, I then hand over to you, Professor Gumede.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Professor Rousseau. Also to the panelists, I'm grateful that that you invited me to facilitate. I mean, it's wonderful to see, you know, the Commissioner, the South Commissioner, Mr. Kieswetter, also Advocate Shamila Batoy. I mean, 2 really great South Africans doing great work under very difficult circumstances. So thank you, Ethics Institute, for having the imagination to bring this together. This initiative is also wonderful. Of course, it feels a bit like a town hall meeting, sort of Wits Great Hall, but online. And I know it's been a very long time since we've been with other people, but I can tell you, thank you for those who've joined. I can feel your energy, the expectations, your questions that you have. There's going to be opportunity for some of the questions to be responded to, and hopefully for some of the questions to be responded to afterwards, because, you know, it's not going to be practical for us to deal with all of the questions. I mean, I'm going to go straight into it. I mean, it's essentially three big questions that we're going to, that panelists are going to focus on. I mean, the first one really would be, what do we need to stop the rot? And then the second one, how do we rebuild institutions, after incidences of corruption and state capture? And then going into the future, how do we future-proof institutions? You know, how do we prevent institutions from, from backsliding back into corruption? Let me start with you, Advocate. And the idea, both of the panelists are going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion. And then we have the opportunity also from the floor, whether the floor online, or, a Q&A, to ask questions, and we will be responding to that. The floor is yours, Advocate.
So let me say good morning to everyone. The program moderator, Professor Gomeda, the CEO of the Ethics Institute, Professor Rousseau, my fellow panelists, the CEO of Siemens, my partner in crime, Professor Kieswetter, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting us. And one of the reasons why perhaps both Professor Kieswetter and I both agreed to this is because this is such ethical institutions is at the heart of what we're doing. And it's so important as not just a topic, but in terms of really trying to make a difference in that space that we have agreed to this webinar. And so, what has happened in South Africa in the past decade or so is well known. It's in the public space. And so, when I came back to South Africa in 2019, February, from almost 10 years in the Netherlands at the International Criminal Court, I came back to find an NPA that lacked the confidence of the people and the people that we as the NPA serve. The country was reeling from 10 years of devastation as a result of corruption. And what happened after that is exacerbated the position, because shortly after that, we suffered the pandemic. And so, we thought, okay, the pandemic is a problem for the world, for South Africa, but can corruption get worse? And it did. We had massive PPE procurement scandals and corruption. And then, as you know, we had the unrest in primarily in KZN and Gauteng, in July this year. And all of this, but at the end of the day, comes onto the laps in some way on the National Prosecuting Authority to try to deal with this. And so, the impact of state capture has been, it's been devastating. And the reality of this is, and people sometimes forget, when we get attacked for what we're trying to do, and the attacks are going to get worse, is that the money that was stolen from this country by corruption was destined for the poorest and the most vulnerable, to deal with the inequality gap in South Africa, to uplift our people from poverty. And all it did is go into the coffers of greedy people wanting power. Totally unethical, devoid of ethics. And during this period, our state institutions were hollowed out, most of them. I mean, Ed and I are experiencing almost the same thing in terms of trying to rebuild the institutions. And we have a long way to go. And the key problem when I came into the NPA, I have to say, firstly, I must say that there are there's over 1,000 people, about employees in the NPA, and the large percentage of them are good, hardworking people wanting to do their jobs in terms of bringing justice for the people of South Africa. But we had a serious issue at the leadership level in the NPA, and that is where all trust was lost in the NPA as an institution. And so coming back to South Africa, you know, when I first when I accepted the appointment by the president, in my opening address, I said to prosecutors in the country, you will have my back as long as you always uphold the values in the Constitution. And so integrity in the NPA is an absolute non-negotiable. But it's not just about what we say. As you've said, how do we create, how do we build institutions? How do we build ethical institutions? And the thing is, when we talk about ethical institutions, an institution is not something that sits out there on its own. An institution is made up of people. And that means you need to have ethical people within institutions for an institution to be ethical. It seems obvious, but it's sometimes people talk about ethical institutions as if it doesn't apply to us. So it's got to start with the leadership. You have to have people that are completely beyond reproach in terms of ethical standards, from the leadership right down to those that are the foot soldiers in any institution. And the leadership sets the tone. And so in the NPA, we have, I mean, building, you know, the rule of law, as we know in this country, has been stretched almost to beyond recognition. And we still have a long way to go. But if we want the country to have trust in us, and if we want to enforce the rule of law, we have to make sure that we are doing things right. And they say, you know, being ethical is about doing the right things when nobody is looking. And so how do you then build an ethical institution? From the NPA perspective, I just want to quote from the Mahoro Commission that said, the NPA must instill a strong sense of constitutional values and belief in the rule of law. When these values are internalized and fought for vociferously from within the NPA, only then will the institution enjoy the confidence of the citizenry and become the prosecuting authority that South Africans deserve. And so, as I said, you know, when I joined, I said to the prosecutors, we are lawyers for the people. We're actually proud lawyers for the people, but the people don't trust us. There's something wrong with this picture. How do we change that? And so, you know, when we started off with our 5-year strategy, developing our strategy, you know, we have very, very high level. We realized that just ticking the boxes and just looking at conviction rates and things like that, which are important, but we need to have high level impact outcomes. So we've set outcomes of people feeling safer in South Africa, which are very ambitious. Our second high level outcome is improving investor confidence. And the third one is access to NPA services, more access, improved access to NPA services. And so, you know, we just focus on improving investor confidence. So we built our strategy. Our strategy is underpinned by 4, what we call our IPAC values, IPAC: independence, professionalism, accountability, and credibility. Credibility is perhaps an outcome of all of the others. But, you know, you talked about how do you future-proof organizations? And from the NPA perspective, it has got to be to build a fiercely independent NPA where everybody upholds the highest standards of integrity. And so, you know, in terms of building an independent institution, I'll share with you that when I first took office and I had a meeting with the president, you know, I sat across from him and I said to Mr. President, the Constitution guarantees the independence of the National Prosecuting Authority, but we know what has happened in the recent past. And I would like you sitting across from me to give me your word that there will be no interference in the work of the National Prosecuting Authority. And I'm so pleased that there has not even been a hint of that attempt to influence the National Prosecuting Authority, from the minister who's been very supportive in terms of trying to give us the resources that we need to do our jobs. But not for a moment do I get a sense that we are being put under any kind of even slight pressure. And that is hugely important. But the building future-proofing institutions, as you say, means irrespective of who the president is, who the national director is, we must make sure that these institutions are independent. And so the first pillar, these pillars that I talked about, they're not just words. We are looking at what does an independent, in respect of all of them, but just let's talk independent. What does an independent NPA look like? And so what are the key characteristics of an independent NPA? And we have got roadmaps that we want to, at the end of the day, say, this is an independent institution because 1, 2, 3, 4, and it must be able to be objectively assessed, even if it means us putting forward recommendations for legislative changes. I've done an affidavit to the Zondo Commission in terms of what we believe should be done to so-called future-proof the NPA, to make sure that it can withstand and cannot be corrupted or influenced in any way in the future. I know I have 10 minutes. So I'm just we can deal with the conversation during question time. But one other thing I want to mention is that we are setting up in the NPA an Office of Complaints and Ethics. That is just the working title at the moment. But one of the important aspects of this is that we must look at the proactive and reactive side of it, in terms of how do we instill a culture of ethics within the organization, and then how do we deal decisively with those that do not meet these standards. And I'm not going to go into any more detail on that, because as I said, we can talk about it, and I'm aware of time. But ladies and gentlemen, what I want to say is that, this is not going to be an easy road. We are very, very far from where we want to be. But, everyone pulling together, and that is within government. I mean, I work very closely with the SARS Commissioner and a whole range of other partners within the law enforcement space. We have to all, and civil society, NGOs have a huge role to play in terms of, but building ethical, where do we start with this? Building ethical institutions. We can do the things, for example, like we are doing in the NPA. But when you look at, if we go beyond, corruption, you look at crime, you think, what happens? Where's the values? And so to build ethics, we've got to go down to what are we teaching our children in schools, in universities? How do we actually instill from children this sense of doing the right thing even when nobody is looking? So I want to end by saying, this is a long and difficult road, but it is the most rewarding work I have ever done. I feel blessed to be given the opportunity to work to help the people of South Africa. And I hope that with good people around the table, we are going to fight the good fight and win. That is why we're here, is because we know we can make a difference. Challenges will always be here. They've always been around. They will always be here. But it is in the meeting of these challenges that we will fashion ourselves as a nation. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate. I think two things from what I'm hearing from you, is that ecosystem. And a part of that ecosystem also involves, very importantly, society. That our society itself, if you don't change the values of a society, because the NPA and also SARS, of course, is operating within a society. So a big part of the changes that we need to do is the changes of values. What is acceptable in our society, and also going forward. Let me, for those who just came in, the questions really, there are three issues that the panelists focus on, and that also Mr. Kiswitter will be focusing on is what is needed to stop in corruption in institutions, and then secondly, how do we rebuild institutions that's been battered by corruption and state capture, and then how do we future-proof such institutions? There was actually a question just before I go to you, Mr. Kiswitter. There was a question on which I thought I'm actually going to respond to, because it was just a definition of somebody outside the country. who was asking, just to clarify what state capture is. And so I just thought maybe quickly just to say, and then somebody so kindly, Tantia so kindly said a quick definition. There is a form of corruption, of course, where a group of people, where there's a political entity, where there's a family, where there's a party, the party or a faction of the party, where they really conspire really to almost capture the whole government, the whole state, almost all parts of the state. Could be the national state, it could be a city, it could be a province, and so on. So that's sort of the shorthand for state capture. Mr. Kismeta, I give you the floor now.
Good morning to everyone, and a special and warm welcome to my colleague, Advocate Batoy. As she said, we work together indivisibly, each pursuing our own mandate, but knowing that we are strongly independent to achieve success for our country. Thank you to the Institute for inviting us and for creating this very important platform. Let me start first by saying that the importance of addressing both private and public sector. Very often the finger, quite rightly, is pointed to government and the political leadership, but as state capture and also the more recent PPE or personal protective equipment corruption scandal has pointed out, social value, and this also speaks to the question, what is state capture? Social value is eroded when there is active collusion between those who have political capital and those who have financial capital. Because for every bribe that is received, there is someone who is willing and consciously intending to gain favor by giving the bribe. And I think, therefore, we cannot address it by simply saying politicians must have integrity. You have to build a societal system of integrity. And it must be prepared to call out and to deal with any actor that has a corrupt intent or a bias towards eroding the integrity of the system. SARS, like the NDP and other institutions, became victims of state capture. The Nugent Commission reported in brief that SARS experienced, during a leadership that had a corrupt intent, experienced a massive breakdown in governance and integrity. It was exposed to the deliberate dismantling of tried and tested institutional arrangements and capacity. It also had marginalization of experienced leadership. In the case of SARS, some 60-odd leaders were pushed aside into non-roles, and through a culture of fear and intimidation, over 2,000 skilled employees, which is almost 20% of the organizational capacity, had left during that time. And that then resulted in a decline in public confidence, in a breakdown of trust within the organization between leadership and the employees, and the ultimate decline in performance, and most notably revenue performance. So to speak to the question, how do we address it? What have we done so far? And also to begin to point to what is the way that we will prevent it, we start with leadership. The theme of this conference is ethical leadership. And in our case at SARS, I have worked with the top 70 leaders, and we have developed unambiguously what we require of leadership, and the fact that we expect every SARS leader to sign up to a unified leadership model. It's clear. If we have more details, I'd love to share it with you. But in short, we have called it steward leadership. Why steward leadership? Steward leadership, I believe, correlates very strongly with ethical leadership for the following reasons. One, steward leaders understand that they hold in trust something that belongs to another. It is not theirs. They act with the passion of owners, but they revere the fact that they are stewards who have been sent to serve a higher purpose. Secondly, steward leadership serve a cause greater than themselves. They have the capacity to go beyond serving narrow factional or even narrow personal interest to serving a greater cause. And thirdly, steward leadership have this incessant yearning to bequeath an organization which is greater than the one they've inherited. In other words, they are mindful continuously of the impact of their work and wish to create value for the organization and ultimately for society. And that's really the core of the rebuilding process at SARS, is addressing the leaders. From the first day, we addressed leaders, we made this clear, we dealt with leaders who, pointed out by the Nugent Commission, did not appear to live up to this code, and we parted ways with 5 of the executive leaders at the time, and then started reassigning roles to leadership for which we believe they were more competent, but also begun to socialize and engage them on what we consider to be the desired attributes of a SARS leader. Then, beyond leadership, it's then communicating a few important matters of clarity to the organization. Now, you would know, and those who don't understand, that SARS is a creature of law. Our mandate is defined in law. The powers of the commissioner is defined in law. However, the law defines what we do. More importantly, we develop clarity of purpose in the organization, which is about understanding why we do it. And in our case, we are clear that our work enables government ultimately to transform the lives of South Africans towards social, material, emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being. And our work provides the resources to that higher purpose. The second area is clarity of vision. And we are clear that the work we do must build a smart, modern SARS with unquestionable integrity that can be trusted and admired. And that is really, really front and center. We measure everything we do against us achieving that outcome. Thirdly is clarity of strategic intent. We are clear of how we will use the resources. We are clear about a program of work that is underpinned by 9 clear strategic objectives. And everything we do, every cent we spend, every time unit that we allocate must underpin this strategic intent. Then the next item is really beyond the organizational structure, processes and policies, all of which have a role to play. It's about the culture that you create in the organization. And we have a few aspects that characterize our culture. Now, we are a work in progress, so let me not speak as someone who have perfected this, but we are on this journey towards creating a culture of accountability. You must be held accountable for the work you do, and we measure that through a framework of clear objectives and measurable key results. Secondly, a strong focus on professionalism, integrity, resource stewardship, and performance excellence. In other words, we move beyond the mere tick-the-box compliance, because tick-the-box compliance produces minimalist, also a culture where people do what they think they want you to do, rather than doing the right thing and doing the best that they can. It is really about transforming not so much the chairs and the organizational structure and the physical edifices, all of that important, but it is about reviewing the core DNA of the organization. And then beyond the organization, it's contributing towards building an ecosystem with integrity. So embedded in our objectives is working with and through stakeholders, and ultimately knowing that we have to rebuild a social compact with the whole of South Africa. How do we prevent it? I think ultimately it is about healing from within. It is about addressing those soft things of value systems, of culture, and it is about exemplifying what we mean rather than preaching it. It is about living what we stand for and being absolutely and unambiguously clear about a system of rewards and sanctions that will advance that cause. Let me pause there, but I'm happy to dive deeper during the Q&A, Professor Gumede. And by the way, you look much younger on screen than what you look on print.
Thank you for that. I'm still going to give you a tough question. What I'm going to do, and I actually thought instead of me asking, questions from me, I mean, it's just such wonderful questions coming from the, from the chat box and so on. So I am actually just going to use, be guided by the questions that we got. But maybe one question for both of you to start off, and then I'll take it from the question and answers. Your one biggest challenge in turning around the institutions, in moving it into an ethical culture, what would it be? The thing that you're struggling the most with? Advocate, if I can start with you.
I was hoping you'd start with Ed. I get my head around this one. What's the one biggest challenge with regard to creating a culture, an ethical culture? Well, like SARS under Ed's stewardship, we are also embarking on a cultural enhancement program within the NPA. And culture isn't changed overnight. It's not an event. Culture change is a journey. And so, I think what is really refreshing, particularly with the issue of dealing with ethics in the organization, is that a large percentage of prosecutors are ethical people. Of course, we have the rotten eggs in the organization that we will weed out, and I've made it very clear to them that they will be fired after a due process. But I think that changing culture has got so many facets to it, and that's not easy. So I think the big challenge is going to be really in terms of, there's some embedded practices in the organization that, it's more about enhancing. I think from the ethical perspective, once we set up the Office of Complaints and Ethics, I'm hoping that we will really be able to drive the proactive and the reactive side to building an ethical institution. And as it starts with the head, and there are little things like, if I want to take a half a day off, and I said to my PA, can you send me a leave form? And she said, but NDPP, you work weekends, and I said to her, no, I've got to put in that 2 or 3 hours. I've got to put in a leave form for it, because that is how it's about doing the right thing. And so I think the biggest challenge, I think, instilling a culture of ethics within the NPA is, as we move with the proactive and reactive side, I feel confident that most of the organization will actually, they want to be part of a proudly ethical organization. And the culture will actually throw out the rotten eggs in the organization. We need to build a culture. I think the challenge is going to be where people need to speak out within the organization when they witness what is unethical conduct. We did a survey, and what was a bit concerning to us is that quite a substantial percentage, of those that actually responded said they had witnessed some kind of unethical conduct, but had not reported it. And that's what we need to delve into. And so, that's going to be the challenge, is trying to really, you're not ratting on your colleague, but that you need to report these issues. So I think that is probably going to be the big challenge, to get people to report unethical conduct. Thank you. I'll leave it to that.
Thank you. Mr. Kiswaser, from your side, I think that, your biggest challenge that gives you sleepless nights?
I actually am so tired by the time I get to bed, I don't have sleepless nights. But I think First of all, we come from an era of state capture, and we have to move to another era of capture. But this time it is about capturing the hearts and minds of our people. And that's the biggest challenge. Changing a policy is easy. Changing an organizational structure is easy. Redrafting the words of a strategy and a vision and a purpose statement is easy. But ultimately, it is about capturing the hearts and minds of the people. SARS is not an act in law or the buildings and the policies. It is the 12,500 people who wake up every morning and live to align themselves to this higher purpose. You know, William, people have, I believe this, people have an inherent desire to be part of something good and part of something noble. But to achieve that, we have to do two things. The first is to be clear. And in being clear, a leader must be clear where he stands or where she stands. Your people must look at you and they must never doubt. You mustn't double speak. You mustn't be ambiguous in what you stand for. You must be absolutely single-mindedly and consistently clear where you stand with. Secondly, your people must know for what they can hold you accountable. Okay? You must be clear. You can hold me accountable for the following things. So be clear about it and say to people, if I don't behave like this, you can call me out. And the third is, in that regard of clarity, is you must also be clear what you will hold them accountable for. Don't try and catch people out. Tell them, this is what I expect of you. And if you don't behave like this, this is the consequence thereof. So that's the first in the hardest part, is to establish a communication and a dialogue of clarity. And the second is to create an environment where people want to be the best version of themselves. And that is not achieved through a command and control structure. It is not achieved through policies and standard operating procedures. It is really about making people believe in themselves, allowing them to be the best version of themselves, and making the resources available for them to respond to the clarity that you've provided them. That's really the hardest part, and that's the work in progress that we are currently engaged in.
Well, thank you for that. I have questions, and I'm using my cell phone to pick up things. So I look down all the time. Is you know how deep the question is, and I'm rephrasing it. How deep perhaps the tentacles of corruption within your organizations? I mean, the idea really, do you have to spend so much time in just cleaning up and getting the corrupt people out that you can't really focus on the job at hand? You know, what is the extent of the corruption within both of the institutions? And what are you doing about it?
Shall I go first and give my partner a break?
This one I can go on fairly quickly.
Then please, Shamila, go.
No, I think this issue of you know, how, I mean, you know, when I took office and when I was interviewed for the position, and that was another good masterstroke on the part of the presidents in terms of having a very, you know, open interview process for the national director's appointment, which is not called for in the Constitution. He can literally pick who he wants. But when I was interviewed, I said, you know, that NPA is like a house on fire. And there's all of this factionalism within the organization, you know. And so it was trying to understand, you know, what are people coalescing around? You know, what's the factionalism about? And there was clearly a divide along the lines of those who supported, let's say, state capture, and those who didn't, or those who were used in this process. And so, you know, trying to deal with that in order to build credibility for the organization, it's important that that is done. But it's these things, there are processes, systems and processes. You can't just fire people because of, you know, what someone said at the Zondo Commission or what. You've got to have systems and processes. And look, a number of people with the Mahoro Commission and with the judgments of the Constitutional Court with regard to previous national directors, some of the key, those that in leadership positions are no longer there. And so, you know, for the first time in March this year, when my last deputy was appointed, I have 3 of my 4 deputies that are now appointed, you know, a full leadership at that level. So I think we've made really, really good progress in that regard to get, you know, to rebuild the institution and having people that you trust at certain levels. But it's not complete. You know, there are still, you know, there are still, you know, people in the institution that I have concerns about. And it's not about, you know, trusting is one thing. It's about simply knowing that people won't do things because I want them to do it, but it's because it's the right thing to do. It's because they are dispassionate and objective in everything that they do. And it goes beyond the National Prosecuting Authority. It goes to the police. Remember, we in the NPA are prosecutors, but we only get dockets that come to us from the police. So we work very closely with the SAPs. It is a challenge. I mean, I speak to General Libya, the head of the Hawks, and I say to him, we need to get people to deal with this, that, and the other, that we trust, and not that we trust to do what we want them to do, but we trust to be objective and look at the evidence and not have agendas. And we're not past that. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done in this regard within institutions, in law enforcement. But as long as we keep doing what we need to do to address those, to make sure that we get rid of these bad apples, you know, we will get somewhere. But it's not going to be easy. This is a very, very difficult issue. And that makes our work in this environment very difficult and challenging. But I still think there's sufficiently good people that you can work around those that you think they don't, that you know, that you have certain reservations around in terms of trust issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start with that last thought of Shamila, to say that you must acknowledge, firstly, that there are more good people, honest people, hardworking people than corrupt people, because you actually need to engage them positively, and they are part of cleaning out the system, because your best defense against any corrupt behavior is when good people in the organization have the freedom to stand up and they know that there's a safe space for them. Because as we know, famously quoted, that you know, corruption thrives, evil thrives when good people do nothing or say nothing. And so for me, that's important. And always place them on a pedestal, make the light shine. Catch people doing things right is an important part of my personal mantra, as opposed to catching people doing things wrong. You know, we have just in the last week, we had a customs officer who turned down a 30,000 Rand bribe. In the last month, and also a customs officer who turned down a significant bribe. We will celebrate those people because that's the kind of behavior we want to celebrate. But at the same time, don't be naive, and therefore have the institutional capacity and capability to respond. At SARS, we have re-established an anti-corruption unit that looks at the behavior of our own employees in relation to their engagement with taxpayers, as well as integrity unit to more proactively look at how do we build an organization with integrity. Currently, we have over 300 active cases of employees who are under investigation at various stages of a disciplinary process. We have, in the last 2 years, have had over 60 resignations or dismissals when we have put the spotlight on people or commenced a process. We have had a number of criminal convictions with the help of Shamila on the prosecuting side. We've had a number of criminal prosecutions of our own employees, as well as taxpayers and tax practitioners who have been in collusive and corrupt relationships. So I think it is about understanding that you leverage the good people to shine, but you act against those who don't live up to the intent and the value system that one espouses for. And I think very slowly, because people don't put up their hands and say, here I am corrupt. So you have to build the institutional antenna to detect very quickly and respond decisively when you do come across an instance of corruption. And my pain sometimes is, and let me speak truth to power and say, when our political leadership don't speak out decisively against corruption, it creates doubt and that further creates an environment for corruption to thrive. So leaders must be clear where they stand in that and act decisively when part of their own do not honor those levels of professionalism and integrity.
If I may just add on what Ed has just said, I mean, it's about leaders not just saying the right things, because I think that's often, we're getting the right messages, but it's about acting in accordance with those messages that gives the confidence that these are not just words, that the actions demonstrate that they're important. And picking up on another thing that Ed said in terms of rewarding positive behavior, this is a bit of a different aspect to it, where we had a person that was charged with reckless and negligent driving or something like that. And the prosecutor was approached by the prosecutor for a bribe to make the case go away. And the person reported it. And I then said to the DPP in the division, what happened to that case of reckless and negligent driving? That actually we should encourage, and he should get a very, very lenient sentence, because we must reward people that actually come forward. And the greater evil is the prosecutor being corrupt, and that we must encourage people to speak out when they're approached for, bribes and things like that. So it's just a little different take on that.
Professor Gumede, if I can quickly add a dimension which I believe is a pandemic in our society and also integral to ethical leadership, is gender-based violence. Let's not only focus on corruption, let's also focus on other scourges of our society. And in the year of Charlotte Makeke, it is important that we also put in the center our behavior and relationship with each other, and in particular, the abuse of women by men. In that regard, we have also created the institutional capacity and also working towards a zero tolerance against that. I'm very encouraged to say that almost 70% of our employees have signed up to a GBV pledge, because that's another example of unethical behavior, is when we treat each other with inconsistent standards that's not determined by our character or by our competence or just by our mere humanity, but is determined by other categories of discrimination, and gender being one that is rife in our society. So let me also not lose the opportunity to also address that very openly as one area where ethical leadership is also required, not just corruption.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask again, both of you, and I'm going to try to just to pick up the questions that are sort of applicable to both. Whistleblowing. I mean, really, we've got a culture in the country where whistleblowing, first, just from a culture point of view, if you think about it, 70s and 1980s, impimpi, so there's sort of almost a societal opposition to whistleblowing. The phenomenon of impimpi, you're a bad person, and so on. So, how does one get out, how does one build a culture where whistleblowing is allowed, not only allowed, but it become acceptable politically, socially, and organizationally?
Yeah, this is a very, it's a hugely important issue. And, without whistleblowers, it will be very difficult to get to the bottom of corruption in the country. And, we do have a witness protection unit within the NPA, which protects witnesses. It's regulated by an act of parliament. But it's about protecting witnesses. And there's this gray line between whistleblowers who are not witnesses. They just simply give you leads and information about what's going on, but are not witnesses at the end of the day. And witnesses and whistleblowers who might potentially be witnesses. And so from our perspective, so this is an important distinction, and therefore as a government we really need to, and we discussed it just yesterday at our anti-corruption task team meeting, about how do we actually deal with whistleblower protection. The Department of Public Service and Administration is looking very closely at how we could actually strengthen the capability of state to deal with whistleblowers. So there's a lot of work going on in the space, but whilst that is happening, you know, if they are whistleblowers and they want to come forward genuinely and speak, they, you know, we will do whatever we can to protect them within the current legal framework, because, you know, there's no other way we can get to the bottom of corruption. But this is a challenging one because we've even got potential suspects who come to us and say they need protection as whistleblowers. You know, I mean, what is it? So, you know, it's a very, very difficult environment, and we can't be wasting our scarce resources, public funds, on protecting the wrong people, you know. So you've got to have very clear guidelines. You've got to have very clear criteria to be able to take on board. But the real genuine whistleblowers are the heroes, because people, it is not easy to speak out in these cases. You're dealing with highly, very, very rich and powerful people who will stop at almost nothing. And yes, we have the case, I see it in the chat, of Ms. Diokaran, who was killed recently. It shows that these people have so much to lose that they will stop at nothing. And so to be one to speak out in the first place is a decision that is not easy for people to make, because, you know, you're giving up on your security, you're giving up on a whole lot of things that, why should I? Let me just stay in my comfortable space. And then, but it's about that higher purpose and really wanting to do things for a higher purpose. And it then comes back to values. But these are not easy decisions to make. And as government, we must be ready to protect and support those who make these very difficult decisions to speak out.
Yeah, I must say this is a difficult issue with no simple answer. But it starts also with, and this is the sad reality of our current situation, that within the organizations, including SARS, the NPA, the Hawks, and the South African Police Service, we still have elements of corruption. We would rather work with criminals. And so that relationship of trust is broken, and it needs to be repaired. And with those of us who have been privileged to be assigned to leadership roles cannot underestimate that's where the work starts, is integrity within our own organizations. Because that's also where the relationship of trust between society and these institutions will start, and people will have the vrymoedigheid. I can't remember now what's the English word for vrymoedigheid. They will feel.
I think it's free will. No.
Yeah, they'll feel that they would want to come forward to engage, because they know that they will be listened to. Important. And secondly, they will not only be listened to, but they will not inadvertently become victims themselves, as our fallen colleague Babita have ultimately paid the highest price, because she came forward and stood her ground. People like ourselves, myself and Annette Petoy, I mean, we have to drive around with protectors, because we ourselves are target of people who want to hurt us and who want to hurt our families. People have tried to come at me via my children, via my siblings, because I sometimes feel that those who perpetrate corruption and crime are better resourced and better organized than we are. But ultimately, as the overthrowing of apartheid proved to us, that it is not one single institution or one single leader, but it is when the whole of society draws the line and say, enough is enough. Tot hiertoe en nie verder nie. No till here and no further. And start in their communities, in policing forums and other social civic organizations that are active today. It is about supporting those institutions so that we build a societal response ultimately to the scourge of corruptions. And whistleblowers is an important but not sufficient instrument for us to develop a comprehensive response to it. But in as far as whistleblowers is, we have to do significantly more to give them the confidence that we will listen and the assurance that they will be protected.
It is, thank you for both sides. Just a burning question, and I'm again going to summarize it. In terms of how do you hold your own staff accountable to the public? Just an example, to make an example. One of the audience members asked in terms of, let's just say, the public prosecutors, people who drag their feet, they're arrogant, they don't engage in a constructive way with members of the public, and very dismissive. And I suspect, I could most probably almost make the same case, maybe with some individuals and such who engage with the public. Where is, from an accountability point of view, if you're an ordinary citizen and you have a problem with an individual or the way you've been treated by the organization or individual within your organization, what do you do? Because there's also part of the ethical conduct, to conduct staff versus citizens, the customers, the public, where, that kind of accountability.
So, we pride ourselves in the NPA as saying we are the lawyers for the people. They are our primary customers. And my mantra to prosecutors is, and I think someone mentioned it in the chat as well, is we are public servants, so we serve. That's what we do. We serve people. We are not the bosses, and we must serve with humility. So that is something that I traveled the country when I first took office, and Corona, regrettably, the second round didn't happen. But in every single part of the country that I went to, I made it clear to prosecutors, we serve the people of this country. We are the servants. And more than that, the people that line the corridors of our courts every day, the victims, they are not there because they want to be there. They are there because they are hurting, because they have suffered some injustice. And they look to us as the prosecutors to take them on this healing journey, to help them deal with this. And so from our perspective, there's no place for an arrogant prosecutor. And we did a survey, and many of the victims of crime say, we just want to, at the end of the day, there may be a conviction or maybe not. But what we want to do is we want feedback. We want to know what is going on. Tell us what is going on in these cases. And at the end of another important issue was, there may not be a conviction, but we want to know that the prosecutor cared. So this for us, our strategy is a victim responsive approach. And so if there's anybody in the country that is treated badly by a prosecutor, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to get an email address to you before the end of this to say, please report it. And there will be consequences. It may just be a question that people need to, it's not like we're going to fire people for that, but you need to understand that this is not acceptable. So there's a lot we are doing in the NPA to make sure that it's about being kind. Why is it so difficult to be kind to people that have been injured and hurt? Showing empathy for our customers, the people we serve. So, that is a very, very important part of the NPA. We want to be a kind NPA that listens and that is responsive to victims' needs, but not just because of words. So if prosecutors are not behaving in this way, then you need to report it. And we will make sure that, that there's corrective action that is taken. There's no place for arrogance. There's no place for dismissive and all of these things that you said in the NPA.
By the way, vrymoedigheid is boldness. But for those of you who wonder why I couldn't find the word, English is actually my second language. I only speak it in self-defense. Another beautiful Afrikaans word, by the way, is waagmoed. And I think people become bold in doing good when being good is publicly recognized as part of the culture. People become bold at doing bad when bad behavior is celebrated and is rewarded and not acted on. And so decisive action against any form of unacceptable behavior, whether through negligence or criminality, I believe our society is sometimes too lethargic in our response to it. And really incumbent on people like Shamila, myself, Andy Motibi, and General Abia, we have to be publicly visible in what we stand for, and we have to be publicly seen to be decisive to respond to any form of unacceptable or criminal behavior. There isn't a single silver bullet that's going to address it. We have to co-opt an ever-growing coalition of like-minded people who believe in the common good and in the common cause. And there are many ways we can do that. We spoke about whistleblowers, we spoke about witnesses, we spoke about their protection, we spoke about making it safe for them, but it's also about those of us making ourselves accessible. And I can tell you, if for those of you who follow me on Twitter, people ask, why are you putting yourself out there? Because I receive so much abuse on Twitter. But it's the only way, by making myself accessible as a leader, that I feel the pain of people who are suffering through any form, whether it is bad service by SARS or whether it is corruption in the system of government. I put myself in that lane to constantly be reminded that the work we do is not yet done. Secondly, we have created within my office a dedicated email, ooc@sars.gov.za, which is Office of the Commissioner, so that people know they can have direct access to the leadership in the organization, in addition to our normal whistleblowing line, phone and email addresses that people can go to. So I think it is an ever-changing dynamic that we just have to be relentless in our pursuit of creating a system that increasingly good will overpower evil. We have a long way to go. This is a multi-generational process, but if we don't start now with greater urgency, then I'm afraid this generation of leadership will have let ourselves and the future generations down. I'm sometimes so surprised when people are so patient with incompetence and with corruption in the system of government, as well as leaders in civil and private society.
Let me just say one thing, Prof. I don't have a Twitter account, and you won't find me on Twitter. There've been a couple of fake ones, they're not me.
Oh.
But my approach is, there's going to be lots of noise. There's going to be people that are going to be attacking me. There are people that are going to be saying nice things. My approach is just block out the noise. I have people in my organization that if there's anything that could cause institutional harm, let me know about it. Let's deal with it in a dispassionate way. But the noise, and there's going to be lots of it, both pro, both con, we close our ears to that and we stay the course and make sure that nothing distracts us from what we need to do in terms of moving the organization and rebuilding our country at the end of the day.
Well, thank you. There was a tongue in the cheek. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Someone in the chat group asks if we reward whistleblowers. So let me say to that person that the reward for a whistleblower is knowing they have contributed towards something good. If we introduce any other financial reward into the system, that in itself becomes another system of patronage and corruption. So doing good is a reward in itself.
I was just a tongue in the cheek. One of the chat box there, advocate, somebody was saying they thought they were following you on social media. Be a better check that.
It's a fake Shamila.
Just another questions that a couple of people have been asking is, in terms of, I mean, a lot of people say, well, SARS is really not moving against, some of the big culprits, the big corrupt state capturers, not dealing with them. Saraj is focusing on sort of, small what do you call it, small flies down at the bottom. And the same also from the NPA, that, where is the big cases, where are the people who are falling because of corruption? I mean, how do you deal with the public perceptions of those? So, of that.
Let me say to the people who say we are doing nothing, to ask them, how do they know? Because we don't do our work in the public domain for the longest of times until the results become public through the court processes. Every taxpayer is afforded the right of confidentiality, and we honor that. It is sacrosanct to the work that we do, taxpayer confidentiality. But they're also not reading the newspapers. Just in the past month, we announced probably the largest recovery of monies from a big state capture project within one of the largest state-owned enterprises. We have recovered 3.5 billion rand. We are pursuing criminal prosecution of some of the individual actors involved in that. So I don't know where people get the information from, but I want to give the assurance that, one, we will not tolerate political interference in the work we do. We have said so publicly. And thankfully, like Shamila, I can say that I have never had a call by the president to ask me to do anything. So the independence has not been compromised. And secondly, we have a long list of various projects in various stages of progress. We will continuously announce that. The reason why maybe there are more reports of lesser known entities is because in number there are just so many more lesser known entities and individual taxpayers. But the gravity and the impact of one state capture tax recovery or conviction is important. And both Shamila and I can tell you, we wish we could make progress faster, but it's also important that we make steady progress, because very often through procedural issues, it's like catching a big fish. You have to make sure that they don't get away by having that skill between, reeling in, letting go, reeling in, letting go, tiring them out. And that's pretty much what we are busy with. And remember, both Shamila and myself are still working with organizations that are not sufficiently funded or sufficiently capacitated at the level that we require them to do. But I am encouraged at the progress that I see. I sometimes wish I can go on Twitter and shout louder about the progress we make, but I have to honor the fact that I'm also mandated in law, and I have to respect that.
No, thank you very much. I can understand why people feel this way, that things are not moving as fast as they should. They would like them to. Let me first and foremost say that, the national director is a hat I wear. It's a job that I'm doing, as Ed very eloquently put it earlier on. And we're just keeping the seat hot so that we can hand over to the next person. But as the person, the human being that I am, I'm firstly a citizen of this country. And like everyone out there, I am appalled by what has happened. And we want to make sure that there's accountability for this. But we have to get it right, as Ed said. And so, and there've been cases, that have come to court, but we need to be tickling them over all the time. These cases, the fact that somebody comes to a Zondo commission and makes a statement, that doesn't make a case that we can bring to court. When we decide to prosecute, we must make sure that we have a reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution. And what does a reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution mean? It means we really have to assess and evaluate all of the evidence that we have. And so admissibility of evidence, saying something at the Zondo Commission does not always mean that these things can easily be admitted into a court of law. And sometimes people are more keen to speak in a commission rather than testify in a court of law. So there's a lot and lots of work that needs to go into building up a watertight case. And so you know, behind the scenes. And even, as I said, there have been cases. I mean, the VBS case, there have been movement in some really big, there's the asbestos case in the Free State. Recently, there was a little offshoot of the Estina case that was brought to court, where previously people who never believed they would see the cases that we thought would never see the inside of a courtroom. Now, do you think people that have been engaging in these criminal activities are sleeping peacefully at night? Do they wonder? So maybe they're not being incarcerated, but it is mental incarceration. I'm not saying we must stop at that. But what I'm saying is that knowing that at any time you can be held accountable and law enforcement is working, and not knowing when that can knock on the door can come, is in itself mental anxiety and anguish. And so there is some payback that's happening at certain levels, because as institutions, we are committed to holding people accountable. So there are green shoots, and rest assured, this is not going to be overnight. And I am as anxious as you are, the public, the people out there, to really make sure that people that have brought our country to its knees almost, that have really left people in positions where they don't have water, they don't have sanitation, they don't have all of these basic needs. Money that was destined for that is gone into the hands of people that didn't think about others, but thought about themselves. And that is what ethics, we've got to inculcate ethics. We've got to get to a point where you think about, what can I do for you, as opposed to what is in it for me. And if we just click that little switch in our heads, that in itself will help us to move towards ethical leadership. So, you know, everyone out there, I'm still in this country. I mean, I came back, and I'm saying it, I earn less money as a national director than I did as the senior legal advisor to the prosecutor in the Netherlands. And I made a tough decision to come back, but there's no regrets, because it's about really giving, and it's about helping. And so I really, the good people, we need to stick to it. This is the new struggle, and we have to jump in there and do our bit. That's the only way we can pull our country out of this. So it will happen. I have hope, I have confidence, and I am impatient too, as much as
Okay.
we will make it happen, and we will make a difference. Failure is not an option.
That is not an option. Thank you. I know we're running out of time, but I mean, this, like, I think just maybe 10 seconds, because there's a question that's been coming about political pressure. So maybe, I mean, if it's like 5 seconds, so both of you can respond to it. Will you bow to political pressure? Is there, you know, political interference in what you do? What will happen if you get, you know, will you resign if you feel, you know, there's inappropriate political pressure?
I will fight it. If we have to take it to the Constitutional Court, I will fight it. Not I as the national director, because that is the office that I need to protect as the person of Shamela. We will fight this. This is my purpose in life now. You know, I don't want to go, you know, if we don't achieve, I came back to South Africa to help the country. We can't run away from it now. So whatever the political situation, you know, good people need to fight any resistance to be able to interfere in these important institutions. And hopefully that time won't come, but if it does, then I hope that the good people of South Africa will help us fight this fight, because it's an important one. So I'm not going anywhere until, well, my term, it's a 10-year term, or until you turn 65. I'm not going to say which will come sooner, but I intend to serve it out.
And from your side, Edward, in terms of, you know, political pressure?
I can say without any doubt and in good conscience, firstly, that I have not been called by a senior politician to influence my work. Secondly, that if I should get such a call, I will resist it. And thirdly, that I have been on public record to say I would sooner resign than give in to public. You know, what people may not know, in my mother tongue, we also say, die beste stierlei staan aan wal. And so there are many critics out there who have probably think they can do this job better than what we do. And I'm sure some of them can, and I would willingly hand over the reins to those who believe they can and in fact are able to do it better. But the personal sacrifice and cost of doing this cannot be. My family still hasn't forgiven me for accepting this job because it has come at great financial cost to me. It has come at great personal cost to me. I have not seen my family for this year since January because of COVID. I have been separated from most of my family for most of the last 3 years because of this job. So people underestimate the personal cost. And when you do this job, as Shamila and I have done, you better do it in a way that is beyond reproach, because if you don't, then the personal cost I've just shared with you, you've actually undermined yourself. You've been unfair and untrue to yourself. So when I decided to give up my life of travel and retirement and managing my own portfolio, there's only one way to do it, and to do it right. If not, walk.
There's a saying, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as night the day. Thou canst then not be false to any man. I conclude with that.
I think, thank you very much. Thank you to Edward. Thank you to Samila. And I think that from my side, really, I think there's been confidence inspiring. There are millions of people behind you, supporting you. Great ambassadors for South Africa, great Democrats. There's a lot of goodwill. People supporting you, people sending you good energies, and God bless. We're all behind you, and I can say that. I think even most way from on behalf of the panelists, thank you. All the best.
And thank you to you, William, for leading a very interesting but also an extremely meaningful conversation. If you kept an eye on the chat, you would have seen that there's huge appreciation for this conversation, and we will make a recording of this available on the website of the Ethics Institute. I also put that for you in the chat. So thanks, William. But to the two panelists, Edward Kieswetter and Shamila Batoy, thank you for sharing your experience. It is absolutely so important what you are doing, and you would have seen the appreciation of people in this meeting this morning for the work that you do. We really value your leadership and also the authenticity with which you presented your own insights. I think there's so much to learn from you. By the way, because there were many questions about how do you institutionalize ethics in organization, there's our latest handbook that deals specifically with making ethics real in organizations, all the proactive and reactive interventions. It's a free publication. You can go to our website, TEI.org.za, and you will find not only that handbook, but also 8 others there. Please make full use of it. As I say, it's a free resource to you. So that leaves me to thank all of you. Can I start by thanking, first of all, everyone who participated in this webinar this morning. There was incredible activity in the chat, hundreds of chats coming through. At the last look, there was about 80 questions just in the Q&A box as well, which tells the story of people really engaging. But then to our 2 panelists this morning, thank you so much for availing yourself. We know what your programs are like. William, for your contribution, Sabina, for your contribution as well. And then finally also to Siemens for sponsoring this event. We look forward to inviting you back to another Ethical Leadership Symposium in 2022.